Okay, what if we could literally rewrite the history of television's most famous relationship? Let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to explore an alternate timeline of a classic story. A story all about timing, insecurity, and that incredibly fragile space between love and misunderstanding. We're taking a magnifying glass to one single narrative turning point and rewriting the script to see what actually happens to a relationship when you remove its absolute most explosive disaster.
Now, what's really fascinating about this question is how skipping just one tiny, impulsive moment at a coffee place completely reshapes an entire love story. What if Ross never slept with Chloe? I mean, it sounds kind of small in the grand scheme of a decade-long saga, right? Almost insignificant when you consider all their breakups and makeups over the years. But that one choice didn't just change a single night. It was the foundational earthquake for years of drama. If you've ever found yourself wondering whether they could have avoided all that heartbreak, well, the answer is absolutely fascinating.
To truly understand this alternate timeline, we have to look at the immense hidden pressures bubbling right before the collapse. On the surface, everything seemed perfectly fine. They had finally become a couple after years of emotional buildup, but underneath, it was a pressure cooker. Ross was battling some really deep insecurity about Rachel's new job, and meanwhile, Rachel was incredibly overwhelmed just trying to prove herself in a very demanding new professional world. Neither of them truly understood what the other needed in that really delicate moment. And that underlying tension brings us to the infamous night. We all know how this original timeline plays out. At 8 p.m., the pressure just completely boils over into a fight, and Rachel asks for a break. The clock ticks. By 10 p.m., Ross begins to spiral. He feels rejected, replaced, and just deeply, deeply afraid of losing her. And then, at midnight, that intense fear leads to an impulsive, emotional mistake with Chloe that shatters their relationship entirely. It's a classic domino effect. Panic completely overrides rational thought, setting the stage for literal years of resentment. But let's pivot to our alternate timeline. Picture this. Ross still leaves the apartment, he's hurt, and he's confused. He still ends up at the club, and he still meets Chloe. The temptation and the pain, they are absolutely still there. But this time, he hesitates. He remembers exactly how long he waited for Rachel. He chooses patience over panic. Just think about that. That single moment of restraint changes the trajectory of the entire show. And this comparison brilliantly illustrates the immediate difference. In the original reality, the morning after is entirely defined by guilt, betrayal, and loud accusations. But in our alternate reality, Ross wakes up with regret over having the fight, for sure, but absolutely zero guilt. There's no dark secret hanging over his head. Rachel still spent the night reflecting and realizing she didn't actually want a break, so when they finally meet up, they show up with vulnerability, instead of yelling, "We were on a break!" So what does this all mean? The absolute game changer here is the shift from an external to an internal conflict. Without Chloe in the picture, the whole betrayal narrative just vanishes. The problem is no longer about some external third party. It becomes entirely internal. They're forced to actually look at themselves and confront exactly why they struggled to communicate in the first place. Why was Ross so threatened? Why was Rachel so overwhelmed? And the beautiful thing about an internal communication struggle compared to a massive betrayal is that this kind of problem is actually fixable. Now, in this timeline, they definitely still hit a rough patch. It isn't just magical perfection overnight. First, they actually have to confront their misunderstandings honestly. They might even take a temporary, healthy separation just to cool off and grow as individuals. But because it culminates in reuniting stronger, it's built on a rock-solid foundation of honesty rather than frantic damage control. And that means they aren't dragging massive emotional baggage and toxic resentment through every single future interaction they have. By looking at this breakdown, we can clearly see a massive shift in their character growth. Originally, Ross and Rachel are forced to learn from heartbreak while they are apart. But here, they evolve together. Ross learns to trust Rachel's independence, and Rachel learns to reassure Ross's insecurities side by side. Instead of iconic, painful arguments echoing for seasons, they don't magically become perfect, but they do become a much stronger, united team. All right, let's move into our next section, the group ripple effects, and how saving one relationship changes absolutely everything else. Look at these domino effects. Without that endless back and forth tension sucking up all the emotional oxygen in the room, television history alters completely. Joey and Rachel's relationship, yeah, that probably never happens, because the circumstances that push them together wouldn't even exist. Ross's later, highly intense jealousy arcs likely become non-existent. The unresolved feelings that lingered in the background for years are completely wiped out. The entire ensemble's dynamic changes because the central anchoring couple is actually stable and facing the world's shared challenges together. But here comes the big catch, a smoother love story, but way less complex. In a world where Ross didn't sleep with Chloe, we absolutely get a more mature relationship and a much quicker path to their happy ending. But would that actually be a better story? By removing the mistake, we kind of lose the very conflict that made their journey so memorable and compelling in the first place.
We really have to talk about the price of perfection here. If they choose patience over panic, we suffer a massive loss of narrative tension. We lose the profound growth that only comes through catastrophic failure. And perhaps most importantly, we lose the messy, human reality of the situation. As incredibly painful as Ross's mistake was to watch, it was a necessary engine for the storytelling. It gave the relationship incredible depth and forced both characters to evolve over years in ways they just never would have if everything had been smooth sailing.
This quote right here hits the nail on the head and perfectly captures why the messy original timeline resonates with us so deeply. Love isn't just about getting it right. It's about learning, failing, and trying again. True human growth often requires making a big mistake. And let's be real, Ross made a massive one. But it was the sheer scale of that failure and the long, difficult road to repairing it that made their eventual reunion feel earned and completely real. So, taking all this into account, would things have actually been better if he didn't do it? They definitely would have been a smoother, happier couple sooner. But as we've seen in this explainer, different doesn't always mean better. Sometimes the mistakes we wish didn't happen are the exact ones that shape everything that comes after. It certainly leaves us wondering, what other hidden, split-second decisions might completely change how we see the stories we think we know so well?